All right. Hi. Um, so, after hearing your main points of argument, there are definitely some good points to be made. However, after having reviewed some of your arguments, here's what I can say. So, you had mentioned getting rid of tips would cause a shift in how customers would express gratitude and would change the relationship between customers and workers due to not being able to be paid for their hospitality. Now, this is true. However, on the flip side of this, it does come with negatives. You see, over time, if servers were to develop relationships with certain customers based off of tips, this could also be the downfall of a restaurant's service staff. The reason being is what this does is it creates a bias for the servers. So, after having worked extra hard, or for example, let's say a server had worked extra hard for a big group of people, only to receive a minimal tip, right? And so from there, and maybe a few other occurrences, it starts to set in and it creates an almost unconscious bias towards certain customers, maybe reoccurring customers or a certain division of customers, right? And so this can cause servers to treat the higher tippers especially well, while the rest of the customers at the restaurant are just treated at the bare minimum because that's what they know they're going to receive. And based off of all this, this is basically the catalyst for the forming of certain biases and preferences. See, this was said best by Eater.com. Servers have biases too, and tipping unleashes them. A growing body of research shows that racial profiling over expected tips, or lack thereof, can encourage hostility and flat-out discrimination. So, rather than each server treating each customer as a new one, they begin to treat every customer with only as much kindness as they think they will receive. And after a while, it can start to create unconscious biases towards every customer that walks in the door. So, without knowing it, every party and customer is receiving a different type of service from every different server. Whereas if wages were increased and tips were abolished, this would create almost an incentive for everyone to work with the same work ethic. And another counter argument that can be made based off of the claims that you gave was that so you had claimed that if tips were to be banned, it would lead to increased prices in order for the restaurant to be making more money in order to pay the server's full wage. Now, this is true. I can't argue against that. However, what was failed to be taken into consideration was the fact that there would be no tips, right? So, even though customers, right, will be paying slightly higher prices for the same food, if you take into consideration the amount they will no longer be having to pay in terms of tips, it can all potentially even out for the customers, to where in the end they will be paying about the same amount. So, along with this, another benefit in doing so is some servers are even paid below the minimum wage as an assumption that the tips will end up making up for the difference, which is why it would be very important to get rid of tips and increase wages, because restaurants would no longer act as if they're going to be getting paid more than they are. Here's a quote by the New Yorker. Restaurants that decide to eliminate tipping typically raise menu prices in order to cover the cost of paying their staff members a substantially higher base wage. Or else they add an automatic service charge for the same purpose. In either case, the increase is usually less than 20%. An example, Joe's Crab Shack hiked prices just by 12 to 15%, so that customers will end up paying around the same price for a meal that they would they would pay the same price that they would under a tipping system. Sorry. So by banning tips, not only would it even out for the customer, but it would finally give justice to the server who has been working and is getting paid below, sometimes is getting paid below the minimum wage, and is just scraping by the assumption from the employer that the server is going to be making enough to make up for it by tips, which is illegal, but it still happens, right? So, yeah, with all that said, that is why I believe that tipping should still be abolished, because there are benefits like this. So, thank you.